Most of you would have seen by now the utter chaos and confusion caused by the large-scale cancellation of flights by air carrier IndiGo. Why did this happen? What happened so suddenly to an airline that was supposed to be doing so well in terms of on-time performance, customer orientation, and so on? Did not planning for the worst possible risk scenarios take place at the management and even at the board levels? Hello and welcome back to Business Matters at the Hindu with me, K. Bharat Kumar. A few days before all hell broke loose on the aviation front in India, I flew IndiGo domestically between two cities in India. Our flight was delayed by about 2 hours, which is better than the 4-hour and 5-hour delays that some others had seen across the country a few days prior. But closer to the 1.5-hour mark, the customer anxiety and anger was building up against the only two on-ground crew members. A few of us passengers actually felt sorry for those two very young people who were as clueless as the passengers as to whether, and if so when, the flight would take off. Finally, something fell into place, the aircraft became available, the pilots were available, and we were soon in the air. What happened so suddenly to an airline that is commanding 65% market share in India, and that airline had to cancel close to about 2,000 flights last week? As the Reuters article tells us, this came about because of shortage of pilots after the airline failed to plan adequately for new rules limiting how many hours cockpit crew could work. Observers warn that a duopoly is unhealthy in this context. A duopoly is where there are only two dominant players that corner a major portion of the market. And because of this, neither of them could be allowed to fail, and that is not healthy for competition. Technically, India does not have a duopoly in aviation. For example, you have SpiceJet, you have Akasa Air, but observers point out that Air India and IndiGo together command 92% of the market, and that is almost like a duopoly environment. Now, the question as to what went wrong with IndiGo in recent days is a question that does not have all the answers, but we do have some information in the public domain that give us some idea. A PTI report cites the Federation of Indian Pilots, or the FIP, as alleging that IndiGo, despite getting a 2-year preparatory window before the full implementation of new flight duty and rest period norms for cockpit crew, inexplicably adopted a hiring freeze. We will get to the details of the new rules for flight duty and rest periods for cockpit crew, but before that, the next question that arises is how come the other airlines were not affected by these new rules? The FIP says all other airlines have provisioned pilots adequately and remain largely unaffected due to timely planning and preparation. It added, the current disruption is a direct consequence of IndiGo's prolonged and unorthodox lean manpower strategy across departments, particularly in-flight operations. Here's a bit about the new rules. A little bit of history will also help us understand the chronological flow of events. Among the several changes mandated, a key rule is to do with the rest required for cockpit crew, as mandated by the DGCA, or the Director General of Civil Aviation. The revised CAR, or Civil Aviation Requirement rules, mandate that cockpit crew, or your flying crew, need to have at least 48 continuous hours of rest before they get back to flying duty. This compares with the 36 hours mandated earlier, which means your flying crew is going to be off air for 1/3 more of the time than they were. So logically, any aviation company would need 1/3 more flying crew to make sure that it keeps to its flying schedules. These norms were released by the DGCA in January 2024. The airlines sought to defer these rules, and finally in the Delhi High Court, which was hearing an appeal by the Indian Commercial Pilots Association, the DGCA committed that the norms would be implemented in 2 phases, the first by July 1st and the second by November 1st this year. So, airlines had close to 2 years to plan for additional crew. Observers say this is about optimum time required because onboarding cockpit crew is not like recruiting freshmen right out of college. It does take time. However, pilot associations insist that IndiGo did not plan adequately for additional crew. Now, here's another aspect. One aspect is, of course, to look at and plan for new rules that you know are coming up, which may require you to have additional manpower. The other is to plan for unforeseeable events, planning for the worst case scenarios that may emerge suddenly. what are called curveballs in business. In a LinkedIn post, retired chairman of Syndicate Bank, Ajay Nanavati, says the real issue is how boards can prepare for these crises when the nature of risks has changed so dramatically over the last decade. This is particularly true, he says, of highly regulated industries like banking and airlines. He also highlights that in this case, his understanding is that the DGCA did give adequate notice, so ignorance or lack of awareness is not a justification according to him. Also, observers point out that boards, management and boards, generally do not look upon risks as black swan events and ignore them. It's not like a black swan event is when you do not anticipate it happening at all. So you see a lot of white swans, but black swan is such a rarity. And I haven't ever seen a black swan. I don't know if any of you have. So it's such a rarity that the probability is so low that you don't plan for it. That's not how it works. Risk management is all about planning for the worst case scenarios. You may recall that IndiGo was co-founded about 20 years ago by two main promoters, Rakesh Gangwal and Rahul Bhatia. But in 2022, following a bitter fallout between these two promoters, Mr. Gangwal announced that he would exit the airline and also sell off his holdings over a period of time. He cited governance issues in the airline. As of August 2025, he had exited his positions in terms of shareholding amounting to an encashment of close to 40,000 crore rupees. Reports indicate that as of October this year, his holding in the airline is less than 5%. The airline's share price ruled at about 5,917 on November 27 this year. On Monday this week, December 7th, it closed at about rupees 4,926, or it had witnessed a decline of 17% over this period. That brings us to the Did You Know section that we have for you each week. Did you know that in 2015, IndiGo's Aviation Limited, or the owning company or the holding company of IndiGo, raised about 3,900 crore in an initial public offering after setting the price at 765 rupees per share? Contrast that with revenue for the 3-month period ended September this year, which stood at about 19,600 crore. And here's the answer to last week's quiz question. The question was, when Nigeria rebased its GDP calculation in 2013, how many more industries did it add to the calculations? The answer is, the revised GDP estimate included measures of 46 industries, up from 33 in the previous calculation. Here's the quiz question for this week. IndiGo is said to be a low-cost airline. How many aircraft does this airline fly, and what is its employee strength? Look out for the answers next week. That's all we have for you folks in this episode. If you enjoyed what you saw, do not forget to like, share and subscribe. Until we meet again next week, have a wonderful time ahead.